They came to my door with badges and clipboards, acting like they were cops, said I was under arrest for breaking some community rules. What they didn't know? I'm a U.S. Marshal. Yeah, they tried to arrest a federal officer with a fake warrant, issued by a woman who thinks running a made-up HOA gives her real authority. But let me back up a bit. This story didn't start with cuffs or plastic badges. It started with a letter in my mailbox. One of those official-looking envelopes with gold lettering and way too much attitude. It read, "Dear homeowner, you are required to register your property with the Sycamore Grove Guardians HOA." I stopped reading right there. First of all, that name sounds like a Saturday morning cartoon. Second, my property wasn't under any HOA. That was the whole reason I bought it. No rules, no random fines, no overzealous board members on power trips. So yeah, I laughed, tossed the letter in the trash and went about my day. But they didn't stop. A few days later, another letter, then another. By the end of the week, my mailbox was stuffed with violations and final warnings. I got fined $250 for aesthetic issues, even though my lawn was mowed and my driveway spotless. $150 for noise disturbances when I wasn't even home. And $200 for not submitting a landscaping plan. I didn't even know that was a thing. It was all fake, completely made-up nonsense. And behind it all? Linda Carroway. She's the kind of woman who lives for control. Short, silver-haired, with that forced sweet smile that lets you know she's dangerous in a church lady kind of way. She started her own little HOA in a neighborhood that didn't even have one, and started throwing her weight around like she was some elected official. One morning I caught her in my driveway, clipboard in hand, like she had just discovered a new species in my flower bed. She actually said, "I wanted to remind you about your outstanding violations." I told her straight up, "I'm not part of your HOA." She smiled and said, "Oh, but we all have to do our part for the community." I smiled back and said, "You stuff one more fake violation in my mailbox, and I file a harassment report." I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. The next week, garbage got dumped in my yard. My mailbox was knocked over. Neighbors started giving me weird looks. I heard rumors. Linda was telling people I had legal trouble, that I was dangerous, that I had a warrant out for my arrest. That's when it stopped being annoying and started getting dangerous. I knew what she was trying to do. She was trying to bully me into paying. But what she didn't realize was that she'd picked a fight with the one person she should have never messed with. And trust me, I wasn't about to let her get away with it. Stick around. It only gets crazier from here. Things really started to spiral after that. I thought Linda would back off once she realized I wasn't scared of her little HOA fantasy. I figured a firm warning and a little reality check would be enough to make her disappear. But no, that woman doubled down. One morning I walked outside and found a pile of garbage, actual trash, dumped right in the middle of my lawn. Coffee cups, old fast food bags, a ripped-up mattress, just sitting there like some kind of message. I checked my security cameras. Someone had rolled up in the middle of the night, headlights off, and unloaded the mess right onto my yard. Of course, the plates were covered, real subtle. A week later, my mailbox was knocked clean off its post. Not some random accident, someone had clearly taken a bat to it. And it didn't stop there. People in the neighborhood started acting weird around me. Folks I used to chat with during morning walks suddenly crossed the street. Neighbors who used to wave looked away. Some mumbled things under their breath when I passed. At first I thought I was imagining it. Maybe I was being paranoid. Then I ran into Mr. Harlan at the gas station. He's a retired veteran, tough old guy, doesn't talk much, but when he does, you listen. He looked at me, kind of sad, kind of embarrassed, and said, "Hope you get things cleared up soon, son." I blinked. "Cleared up?" He sighed. "Linda's been talking. Says you've got some kind of legal situation. Warrant even. Says you're a risk to the neighborhood." I just stared at him. I wanted to laugh, but honestly, I was pissed. This wasn't gossip anymore. This was character assassination. The next morning, I found a letter taped to my front door. Red stamp across the top. Final notice. Inside, it said that failure to comply with Sycamore Grove HOA guidelines would result in legal action, and that a warrant had been issued for arrest. A warrant, signed by Linda herself. I sat at my kitchen table, holding that piece of paper, and just started laughing. Not a funny laugh, more like one of those laughs you let out when you're too mad to yell. This woman really believed she could fabricate legal power and scare me into line. That's when it hit me. Linda wasn't just harassing me anymore, she was escalating. This was psychological warfare. But here's the thing, she thought she was dealing with some regular homeowner. A guy who didn't know his rights. Someone who would back down when faced with official threats. What she didn't know was, I've signed off on real warrants. I've arrested real criminals. I am the law she's pretending to wield. And now she'd crossed the line. I didn't confront her. I didn't rip the notice off my door and storm down the block. That's what she expected. That's what she wanted, to provoke me into some scene she could use against me. So I waited, and sure enough, the next day, another notice showed up. Same red stamp. Same threats. This time, she even slid one under my windshield wiper. By day 3, there were 2 more notices. One taped to the back gate, and another stuck to my trash bin like some twisted treasure hunt. It was almost laughable how committed she was. And then came Friday. I opened my front door and found 2 men standing in my driveway. Both wore matching polos with HOA Enforcement Division stitched in cursive across the chest. Cheap clip-on badges, walkie-talkies, the whole dollar store cop look. One was tall and thin, the other short and trying very hard to look tough. I stared at them. They stared back. "Morning," the tall one said. "You Ben Crawford?" I crossed my arms. "Who's asking?" "We're with the Homeowners Association Enforcement Division," he said, trying to sound official. "We're here regarding your outstanding violations." I didn't respond, just kept looking at them, long enough to make them shift their weight. The short one cleared his throat. "We have an active warrant for your arrest." That was it. That was the moment. I almost lost it laughing, but I held it in, let the silence stretch. "A warrant," I repeated. "Really?" "Per HOA regulations," the tall one said, fumbling with a clipboard. "You've failed to comply with community standards. This warrant authorizes us to take you into custody." It was such a train wreck of a lie that I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. I kept my tone flat. "Okay then, let me see the warrant. The real one, issued by a judge. Not something your HOA president typed up in Microsoft Word." They froze. I could see them scrambling in their heads, looking for an excuse. And that's when I knew. They didn't even believe their own act anymore. That was their biggest mistake. And now? Now it was time for my move. I let them stand there for a beat, soaking in the silence, still holding their little clipboards like that gave them authority. Then, calmly, casually, I reached behind me and pulled out my wallet. They both tensed like I was reaching for a weapon. But no. What I pulled out was way more dangerous to them than a gun. My badge. A real one. Not some plastic toy from a party store. Not a laminate card with glitter glue around the edges. A legit U.S. Marshal badge, federal ID, full credentials. I held it up between 2 fingers so they could get a good look. The tall one went pale. The short one took an actual step back, his eyes darting between the badge and my face like he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. I tilted my head, real calm-like. "You 2 just attempted to detain a federal officer." The clipboard slipped right out of the tall guy's hands and hit the driveway with a hollow slap. I wasn't even mad anymore. I was impressed, genuinely impressed by the sheer stupidity. "Now," I said, stepping forward just a little, "I have 2 questions." They didn't answer. They didn't blink. "First, where exactly is your legal authority to make arrests?" Silence. "Second, would you like to be charged with impersonating law enforcement before or after I run your names through the system?" That did it. Short guy turned and bolted. I mean, sprinted down the street like his shoes were on fire. Tall guy hesitated for half a second, looked at me, then looked at his friend vanishing in the distance, and ran after him. I stood there, arms crossed, watching them disappear around the corner. And I smiled. Because now, I had them. See, up until now, Everything Linda did was annoying, petty, borderline harassment. But sending fake cops to my house with a fake warrant? That crossed into criminal territory. And I was done playing defense. That night, I ran their names. Turns out neither of them were licensed for anything. Not security, not law enforcement, not even pest control. They were just guys. Guys Linda had paid under the table to pretend to be some HOA task force. But that wasn't the part that made my blood run cold. What I found next was bigger. They'd done this before, not just to me. Linda had been running a full-blown racket, fabricated citations, phony legal notices, staged enforcement visits. She targeted homeowners who didn't want to join her fake HOA or who pushed back against her fake authority. People who didn't know any better. People who got scared when someone showed up in a uniform and threatened to arrest them. And it had worked. She'd scared people into paying made-up fines, threatened them with fake lawsuits, even seized properties under false pretenses. Properties that were then resold to buyers handpicked by her HOA circle, probably at a discount. Probably with a fat cut going to Linda. This wasn't just fraud, this was organized theft. And somehow, no one had stopped her, because most folks just rolled over and paid, or packed up and left. But me? I wasn't going anywhere. And now that I had the proof, I started digging deeper. I pulled city records, combed through public complaints, old court filings, found her fingerprints all over shady evictions, disputed fines, foreclosures that never should have happened. There was even a local magistrate who'd rubber-stamped half her filings, either because he was lazy, crooked, or both. And suddenly, I had leverage, legal gold. Because if Linda's paperwork trail was bogus and the judge's approvals were suspect, then every person she'd screwed over might have grounds for lawsuits, refunds, even criminal charges. Her little empire was built on paper, and now I had a lighter. But I didn't burn it down yet. Not right away. First, I needed to see just how far she'd go, so I played along. I took her latest final notice, scribbled out a response, and mailed it back like I was nervous, like I was cracking. And wouldn't you know it? She took the bait. The next day, I got an email. Formal looking, rambling about dispute resolution proceedings and a mandatory arbitration hearing scheduled for Friday afternoon. No courthouse address. Just a vague line about a community center on Elm Street. No judge. No lawyer. Just a time, a date, and a warning. Failure to appear will result in further legal action, including potential seizure of property. It was the most obvious bluff I'd ever seen. But that was perfect. Because Linda thought she'd finally worn me down. She thought she had me right where she wanted me, nervous, scared, ready to give in. But what she didn't know was that I had already made some calls of my own to real authorities. And Friday wasn't going to be a negotiation. It was going to be an ambush. Friday came fast. I showed up to the arbitration hearing 10 minutes early, dressed in plain clothes, just jeans, boots, and a worn flannel. Nothing fancy, just your average guy who looked like he might be a little out of his depth, which is exactly the image I wanted Linda to see. The meeting was being held in the back room of the Sycamore Community Center, a beige little building that smelled like mop water and old carpet glue. Hardly the kind of place you'd expect legal proceedings to take place. But hey, it was perfect for a scam. When I stepped inside, Linda was already there. She sat at the head of a long folding table, flanked by 3 people I recognized from her so-called HOA board. They had clipboards, water bottles lined up, and even a little wooden gavel sitting in front of her, like she was Judge Judy's evil twin. Across from them sat 2 nervous-looking homeowners I'd seen around the neighborhood. They had papers clutched in their hands, eyes darting between each other like they weren't sure if they were about to be fined or executed. Then Linda looked up and spotted me. She smiled that syrupy, smug smile she always wore when she thought she had the upper hand. "Mr. Crawford," she said, gesturing to the empty seat across from her. "So glad you decided to participate." I gave her a polite nod and sat down slowly, folding my hands on the table. Wouldn't miss it. She didn't waste time. Right away, she launched into a monologue, reading from a stack of papers, rattling off a list of infractions so long it could have wrapped around the building twice. Lawn violations, noise complaints, structural issues, refusal to pay community dues, refusal to submit to arbitration. She used legal-sounding phrases like breach of community standards and non-compliance with governance protocol, none of which meant a damn thing. I let her talk. I didn't interrupt. I just watched. And what I saw was fear. Not mine. Hers. It was in the way her fingers twitched every time she shuffled her papers. The way she kept checking the clock, glancing nervously at the door like she was waiting for something or dreading it. She wasn't holding a hearing. She was stalling. I leaned back in my chair, tilted my head, and cut in mid-sentence. "Let me guess," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The HOA Enforcement Division is on their way to drag me out of here?" The room froze. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. Linda's eyes flicked, just for a second, toward the entrance. Bingo. I checked my watch and smiled. "Well, before your little cosplay cops show up, how about we bring in some actual legal professionals?" Right on cue, the doors burst open. Uniformed officers poured in, real ones. Not weekend warrior mall cops, not guys in embroidered polos. These were local law enforcement officers with badges, bulletproof vests, and arrest warrants. And behind them came the big guns, an assistant U.S. attorney, stone-faced and holding a folder thick enough to crush a laptop. She stepped forward, not even glancing at me, eyes locked on Linda. "Linda Carroway," she said, voice like steel. "You are under arrest for fraud, extortion, impersonation of law enforcement, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud." Everything stopped. Linda stood there frozen for a full second, then started laughing, high-pitched and forced. "This is ridiculous. I don't even know what this is about." "Oh, you know," I said, finally letting the grin spread across my face. "Fake cops, fake courts, fake violations. You've been busy. The two homeowners sitting across from me?" They looked like they were watching a movie, eyes wide, jaws slack. Linda's board members? Gone. One actually ducked under the table and crawled out the side. The others backed away, hands raised like they were being robbed. "And Linda?" Linda finally snapped. "This is all a misunderstanding," she shrieked, backing away as the officers cuffed her hands behind her back. "I didn't do anything wrong. I was just following procedure." The U.S. attorney didn't even blink. "We'll let the judge decide." They led Linda out, still yelling, still pleading. Her once perfect hair was a mess, her fake authority in shambles. The sound of police radios and rustling cuffs echoed through the room as the door slammed shut behind her. And then, silence. For about 5 seconds, nobody said a word. Then the room exploded. The two homeowners across from me started firing off questions. "Wait, is this real? Is she really going to jail? Can we sue her?" The board members who hadn't bolted were now frantically trying to explain themselves, but no one was listening. Because in that moment, the illusion shattered. All the fear Linda had used for years, those threats, those fake fines, the phony legalese, it all collapsed like a house of cards in a thunderstorm. She wasn't the law. She wasn't the boss. She was just a con artist with a clipboard. And now, she was finally facing real consequences. I stood up, grabbed my folder, and headed for the exit. As I passed Linda's empty chair, I gave the little wooden gavel a light tap. Just once. For dramatic effect. The fallout was fast and beautiful. By the time the sun set that day, Linda Carroway's mugshot was already circulating online. The headline? "Fake HOA president arrested for fraud and impersonating law enforcement." Her picture looked nothing like the put-together, in-control woman she always pretended to be. Makeup smeared, eyes wide, mouth half open like she still couldn't believe it was real. But it was. Within the week, every single member of her bogus HOA board was under investigation. Some lawyered up. Others came forward, trying to cut deals. Turns out, at least 2 of them had been cashing in on those illegal home seizures she orchestrated, snapping up foreclosed homes for pennies and flipping them for profit. the entire operation unraveled. Homeowners across the neighborhood started speaking out. People who'd been quiet for years finally stepped into the light, sharing stories of harassment, intimidation, made-up fees, and threats of losing their homes. One elderly couple broke down in tears at a community meeting, saying they'd sold their house out of fear after receiving a seizure notice for $6,200 in unpaid landscaping fines. They never owed a dime. All of it had been fake. And the best part? With the U.S. attorney involved, this wasn't just civil court drama. It was federal. Linda wasn't facing a slap on the wrist or a fine. She was facing real prison time, wire fraud, mail fraud, impersonating a federal officer, extortion, conspiracy, and when the judge finally handed down her sentence, she didn't walk out. She was taken straight into custody. No more clipboard, no more fake power, no more Community Queen Act, just an orange jumpsuit, a concrete cell, and a future full of regrets. As for the HOA itself, completely dissolved. No more fines, no more phony inspections, no more shady meetings behind closed doors. The neighborhood is finally free. The families who'd been scammed got their refunds. Some filed lawsuits. A few are pushing to get their homes back. And me? I got my peace. No more notes on my door, no more strangers showing up with clipboards and plastic badges. Just quiet mornings, fresh coffee, and the occasional smile when I walk past Linda's old house, which, by the way, is still sitting unsold. Stripped of its fake power, it's just another property now. Empty, forgotten. Sometimes I pause and look at it, and I think about how far people will go for control, how far some will go to fake authority, and how sometimes, when you least expect it, the right person pushes back. So yeah, if you're ever feeling cornered by someone flashing fake rules and false threats, remember this. Just because someone acts like they're in charge doesn't mean they are. Thanks for sticking around to hear my story. If you enjoyed it or just love a good takedown, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. I've got plenty more stories where this came from. And trust me, it only gets crazier from here. See you in the next one.